Good morning. My Professor Cho set me up there. There's a lot of pressure now. He's seen me speak before, so only he will know if I make any mistakes, right? But listen, good morning. It's wonderful to be here. And today I'd like to share with you a model, a highly innovative and highly effective model for higher education, one that we believe can better prepare students, young minds, anyone, as a matter of fact, for our current world. And so let's talk about that. Now, before we do, let's talk a little bit about the past. We're talking about the future today. Yesterday, we heard a lot about that. But think about universities, think about schools, and think about where they've been, right? Here's an image from a university hundreds of years ago. 14th century, I think. You could even see the person sleeping in the background. It must be a very interesting class, right? But the reality is, here's a more recent image, right? Universities, in fact, schools of all kinds, have remained the same for decades. In many cases, for even longer than that, right? And so, the idea is that because of such, right, and because of the fact that, listen, our world has changed so much. We've heard so much about this today. We've heard so much about this yesterday. We all know this. We live this, right? Information is ubiquitous nowadays, right? Change happens at a pace that we've never seen before. And technology accelerates that change, right? But again, our great universities of the world very much remain the same. Perhaps because of this, students nowadays, young people, right, are not being effectively prepared for our modern world, let alone for the modern workplace, right? And let me share with you just one piece of data that says a lot about this. We call this the preparation gap, right? So several years ago, Gallup, probably the most prominent polling organization in the United States, asked a question. The same question they asked of two different groups of people. The first group of people were chief academic officers at universities, so deans and provosts and presidents of universities, right? And they asked them, they said, do you believe your universities effectively prepare people for the current workforce, modern era? And overwhelmingly, pretty much 100% said, yes, we are doing a good or a great job of preparing talent. Right? Well, the interesting thing is, they asked the same question to employers. And there was a very, very different answer, right? And I think many of us may have experienced this personally when we were either in university or studying in university, even working in a university. And there was a huge chasm, there was a huge gap between what is needed and what is actually being delivered. Right? Okay, I think we know this. We've talked a lot about this. What are we going to do about it? Well, let me explain to you and show to you what some people actually are doing about it. I'm talking about future schools. What should future schools look like? This is something that's here right now. We say, listen, it's the 21st century. It's been the 21st century for a while. We need a new approach for our new era. What should that look like, right? In terms of where students actually study, right? In terms of what they actually study, what they learn. It also, we believe, should look very different than traditional universities in terms of how they learn. We know so much about how the brain works that we didn't know 50 years ago or 100 years ago, let alone even several hundred years ago, when many of our world's greatest universities were built. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about, at least at this institution, who actually will study here, who does study here, and what this means for international accessibility. So let's first talk about where, right? And this institution, right, believes that we should be much about educating globally minded citizens. And listen, if you're going to understand the world, right, we believe you have to live in it. You have to experience it. So why not do that? Why not take 4 years, and let's just assume this is still a 4-year experience, and live in 7 different cities and countries around the world. So San Francisco, see them here, in case your eyes can't see them too well. San Francisco, Berlin, Germany, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Seoul, Korea, right? Hyderabad, India, London, and Taipei, right? And it's more than just students going to these places and hanging out there for a matter of weeks or months. It's about immersion, right? It's about curating and designing and creating a set of experiences that engage students and almost, I say, force engagement and contact and impact with local communities, right? Because the reason you want to understand other folks is to develop that understanding and empathy for other people around the world, right? So it's a little bit about how we at least think the where component of future university. Again, a university here now should look like. Let's talk about the what. And there's a heck of a lot that could be said about this, but I think today we heard a lot about, what should people study? Last week, Professor Cho and I were at an event, and we talked a lot about what should universities, what should schools, we were focusing on colleges, what should universities teach students? What should students learn, right? In a world where information is everywhere, there's something called the internet. Maybe you've heard of it, right? There were books before that, right? But information is easily accessible, right? In a world like this, what becomes even more important, even though it was probably important before, are these key transferable capacities that you can therefore apply to anything. And most importantly, this allows you to keep learning and keep adapting over time, right? So when that AI robot taps you on the shoulder and says, get off the assembly line or get out of the office, right? It's not a wonderful thing, but it's okay because you can keep adapting, right? So the ability to think critically, to creatively problem solve, to communicate effectively, to interact effectively with others becomes even more important in our modern era. I think everybody knows this, regardless of what you do, whether you work in education, whether you work for the government, whether you're in your business, right? These are the capacities we need to succeed, sometimes even just to get by in everyday life, right? But yet, these are capacities that universities really don't teach. I mean, listen, I attended an Ivy League university in the United States, which says it teaches these things. But it does not. No way. It disseminates information as it has been doing, in that case, for hundreds of years, right? So what it should be about is a structured, scaffolded learning experience, right? That starts with those transferable skills, that involves content acquisition as well. But listen, whatever content you learn in university, you're going to forget most of it, right? And a lot of it won't be applicable. I think last week we were hearing an engineering dean talk about how the half-life of engineering content is about 3 to 5 years. So by the time you graduate from university, the content you learn is obsolete, right? But transferable skills, learning to apply them across multiple disciplines, something called FAR transfer, and practicing them again and again and again, something called deep processing, this is just basic cognitive science, right, can be very effective, right? So that's a little bit about what. We talk about what and where. Let's talk about how, right? Because we also know so many things about how the brain works. And we know the brain needs to learn actively. So right now, you are not learning actively, right? You are learning passively. I'm lecturing. So you're going to forget most of what I'm saying. I'm not saying you're dumb. I'm just saying that that's the way our brains work. But if there were 10 of us here and we had an active discussion, right? A very active discussion, whatever the topic was, your retention rate would be better, right? Let me show you what a Minerva classroom looks like, right? That employs what we call fully active learning. That means that every person in every class has to be engaged as close to 100% of the time as possible, right? But at least 75, 80% of the time. Fully active learning. This classroom is actually called the Active Learning Forum. It actually has a name, right? We had to create it, we had to invent it. And in it, we used every pedagogical tool that has been proven to work over decades of use elsewhere. We didn't have to invent these things. They already exist. Let's take a look at what that looks like.
The Active Learning Forum is the unexpected learning forum, the place where you're constantly engaging with what you're learning.
As a Minerva student, I get to take classes from anywhere in the city.
All of Minerva's classes are taught in the seminar format with a maximum of 18 students.
Everyone agrees that higher education could be much better than it is today. Minerva's acting on that by putting together state-of-the-art technology and superb pedagogy. We have at our fingertips tools that are designed to engage the students 100% of the time.
When you characterize a problem, it's important that it helps guide you to the solution.
Perfect, that's excellent.
In a normal classroom, there's people behind you, there's people to the side of you, but it's nice to be able to see everybody and their reactions to what's being talked about in class.
I feel like I'm in a room with all of my students. I simply forget I'm on the computer. You will be going into breakout groups?
It's the kind of learning where we're an active participant instead of a passive recipient, and it's so much more fun than a traditional class.
We are the only school in the world that uses the science of learning to design not just what we teach, but how we teach it.
Minerva students live and study together. Having that human interaction really strengthens the online class experience.
We can do things with education that has simply never been possible before, and that's what we're trying to do at Minerva.
So we can do things with education that have not been possible before, taking all that we know about pedagogical science, coupling it with some technology, and creating a more effective classroom. And no, I didn't get the subtitle language wrong. I live in China, so I put Chinese subtitles on my thing, and I don't speak Korean, so I haven't put the Hangul subtitles on there yet, right? So maybe somebody can help me with that, okay? So we talked a little bit about, in this model, about the where, the what, and the how. Let's talk about the who, right? Because this university believes about doing things a bit differently in many ways, but also in terms of who should actually come to study. So unlike most top universities, certainly in the United States, and probably most everywhere, right? Or most of the students are local, right? And listen, at the US, where I went to school, this is done by forced quotas, by discrimination, right? It's much more difficult for an amazing Korean student to get into Stanford than it is for a not-so-amazing American student. We all know this, right? But Minerva says, listen, this university is just looking for talent. And talent knows no geographic boundaries. There are smart people everywhere. And for that reason, because we're only looking for these types of students, about 80% now of Minerva's students are not American, even though this is a U.S. university. Another important aspect of the accessibility, right, is that we believe an amazing higher education should be more financially accessible. Now, universities, for example, in Korea and some other countries are not necessarily as expensive as many of ours in the United States. But listen, nowadays, you will spend, all expenses considered, $60,000, maybe $70,000 a year, maybe more, per year, right, at a traditional top school in the United States. You know, at Minerva, it's maybe a quarter to a third of that. Right? We believe in providing a better education for less. Right? Okay, so what? You say, oh, this sounds sort of nice, this sounds cute, right? But does this work, right? So what's going on here, right? Sounds like pie in the sky type of stuff, right? I'm going to share with you 3 proof points, right, that show this is a highly effective way of doing things. Right? So first of all, first sort of proof point is that, listen, there's a lot of demand for what we do, right? So last year alone, which was only our 4th year of accepting applications, over 20,000 people from around the world, from pretty much everywhere around the world, applied to come to Minerva. Now, we're very selective, of course, right? Even though this model is suitable for anybody, our school is very selective, right? But there's a high level of demand. In fact, since we have been accepting applications for 4 years now, over the past 4 years, over 50,000 people have chosen to apply to Minerva, right? Interesting. So, but okay, that's just demand. That doesn't say much about what we're actually doing. Let's talk about another interesting proof point. So there is, who knows about the CLA Plus assessment? Has anyone ever heard of this? Raise hand. Nobody? Okay. There is an assessment. It's not associated with a university. It's just a third-party independent assessment called the CLA Plus. And the CLA Plus tests exactly what our universities in the United States say that they want to teach. Which means it doesn't assess biology or math. It's not a PISA test. Korea does very well in a PISA test, right? It assesses critical thinking ability, application of critical thinking. It assesses problem-solving ability. It assesses effective communication, again, which is what many U.S. universities, they say they teach, right? And which is definitely what Minerva teaches very effectively, right? So this is interesting. So not all universities, but hundreds, over 500 universities take this assessment in the United States and maybe more around the world, right? And it's interesting that Minerva, in just a few short years, has achieved the best results ever for our students in this assessment. And again, assessing things that university is supposed to teach and that actually is needed in our modern world. Let me show you these numbers. So our first-year students, we assess them before they ever come to Minerva. So a student comes to Minerva, right? We assess, they take the CLA Plus, right? Third-party test, not our test. Our students are very smart, right? Because we're very selective. Our students, even before they start Minerva, are better than 78% of all graduating university students. So a student before they even start Minerva is better than most students who have been to university elsewhere for 4 years. Okay, our students are smart. However, the thing that's even more fascinating is this, that after 1 year, after their first year at Minerva, 8 months, 1 school year, Minerva students perform better than over 99% of graduating seniors everywhere. Let me say that one more time. After 1 year at Minerva, our students perform better than pretty much every other university graduate. Ivy League, top liberal arts schools, right? In fact, Minerva has achieved, we've broken a new record for the CLA Plus, has achieved the highest performance overall in the aggregate ever, right? This works. This works. And then finally, I just want to, this was a quote, I saw this last week, the president of the organization, it's a not-for-profit organization that runs the CLA Plus, tweeted this, and he said, the measured increase in performance seen among Minerva students is extraordinary, and they're contributing to learning outcomes. That was just from last week, last Friday, they tweeted that. Okay. Let's talk about one final proof point here, right? And that is that you say, okay, that's a test, that's an assessment, right? That's not the real world. Let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about real-world performance and feedback about our students from employers, right? Because employers like these, right, have almost 90% of our students, after just 1 year, do internships and work study and research in the summertime, right? So we have a good pool of data, right, and employer data to choose from, right? What's interesting is that every single company or entity or whatever that has employed Minerva students, right, says Minerva students after 1 year, again after 1 year, perform better than, or perform above the expectation, at or above the expectation of any university third or fourth year students, any university students, period. And usually the comparison is against third or fourth year students, right? So what we've seen from employers, right? We don't see, most employers say 11%, 11% of employers believe that students are effectively prepared. But what we're seeing with our students, even before they graduate, is feedback that says what your students can do, what they can apply, how they can apply these transferable skills to various types of problems, right, is unprecedented in terms of a university level types of students. So, still 7 minutes left. It's good because I'm hoping there are going to be some questions or some ideas, after we talk. So, hope this gives you a bit of an idea about not only about what can be done, but what is being done, right? A new but highly effective, right, model for university education going forward. So, hope to hear your thoughts in a bit. Thank you.
Yes, please. Big round of applause, please. Thank you so much.